Shalom Aleichem. Today is Yom Hamishi b'Shabbat, Thursday, Aleph b'Mar Heshwan, the beginning of the month of Heshwan, which is the 8th month. According to our calendar, the year is Telshin Pewal, and according to the Gregorian calendar, it is the 23rd of October, 2025. For those who still require that crutch, the Gregorian crutch, I call it. We shouldn't need such things, because a Jew has to think in Jewish terms, which means, amongst other things, thinking in terms of time, dividing time, appreciating time, conceiving of time according to our own authentic conceptions and not according to the conceptions of others. This is a very major discussion in and of itself, which we can touch upon another time. And we continue in our study of Sefer Yirmiyahu. We are in Perek He, chapter 5, Pasuk Aleph. And the Pasuk says as follows: Shottatu b'chusot Yerushalayim. Uru'una ud'u uvakshu v'rhovotheha. In other words, go out into the streets and the marketplaces of Yerushalayim and seek the following. What should you seek? Im timsa'u ish, see if you can find a man. Im yesh oseh mishpat mevakesh emunah ve'eslah lo. See if you can find a man who acts justly and that's a good question, how to translate the word emunah here in this context. We'll see what the Mefarshim say. And I will forgive them, says Hashem. First of all, we have Targum Yonathan, which says as follows: Halichu b'shukei Yerushalayim, walk out on the streets. The word shuk means the main thoroughfares, I should say. The main thoroughfares of a town are the shuk, the shwakim. That's also Mimela where you have the markets. So shuk is a market, but it also means just the thoroughfares of the town, of the city. Wahazo, and see, Cha'an, please, Uda'u, Uva'o, Birhovaha, check, see if you can find in its streets, Im tishkahun gevar, if you will find a man, Dele Ovadin Tovim. In other words, Targum Onkolas, Targum Yonathan, I should say. Yonathan translates the words Osam Mishpat as a man who has to his credit good deeds, Ovadin Tovim. Im ith Aved Din Dikshot, if there is someone who does justice, Ba'e Hevanutha, someone who literally seeks faith, and I will forgive them. In other words, clearly the pasuk is telling us that the situation in Yerushalayim at this time, just before Churban Bayit Rishon, is very dire. In other words, the ethical, the moral fiber of Yerushalayim being the main city of Mamlechet Yehuda, the southern kingdom of Judea, is very, very dire. In other words, it's essentially a rhetorical question. In other words, Hashem is saying, you can go and check for yourself, but I can tell you already ahead of time, you will not find such a person. Let's look at the next pasuk. Pasuk Beth, hang on. Wa'im Hayaduna yomeru lachen lasheker yishavehu. And even if they will swear to you about something, that it is so, that they will say, no, this is definitely what I'm telling you is true, I swear it. Lachen lasheker yishavehu. You should know they swear falsely. The Targum Yonathan says, V'im bishma d'Adonai yaman. Yaman means to swear. B'chen l'shikra inun mishtaba'in. Any oath that they take is a false oath. Do not believe a word they say. In other words, this is a very important statement that we understand, that we should understand from here. Namely, that if you see a society is riddled through with sheker, with falsehood, with deceit, and a lack of trust between people, because people know that you can't trust anyone, you should know such a society is extremely ill, and its end is very possibly near. Furthermore, Pasuk Gimel, Adonai, Einecha halo le'emunah, and I know, Hashem, that your eyes, literally, what you seek out and what you care about, and that which you reward is emunah, faith. That is to say, what we could also translate as yosher. In other words, honesty, being straight, being honest, speaking the truth. Hikitha otham wala halu, and as a result, because they are not so, and you have tried to straighten them out, you have brought about various calamities. Hikita otham, literally, you have struck them. Wala halu, but they don't. It's as if they don't care. They don't take note. They don't seem to feel it. Kilitham, you have literally destroyed them. You have brought great destruction upon them. Me'anu kahath musar. They refuse to learn from their mistakes, to do teshuvah, as we're about to see the next few words. Hizziku fanahem misala. They have literally hardened their faces. In other words, their hearts are like stone. They refuse to learn or to change course. Me'anu rashuv. They refuse to do teshuvah. Targum Yonathan. Adonai hala ghelei kadarach lo tavar le'avadehim himenutha. Your aim, Hashem, is to reward those who do good, and also to try and straighten out those who are not doing the right thing. Rashi Aya, the evildoers, El Al Yathahon, you have struck them, Wala and they have not literally done teshuvah. Shethithinon, you have harmed them and brought tragedies upon them. Sarivu, they refuse. Kabbalah ulfan, they refuse to learn. Ulfan is teaching, lesson, like an ulpan, right, today. Athkifu apehon mitinora, their faces are harder than stone and granite. Musaravin lametav, they refuse to do teshuvah. Here Rashi says, if you can see Rashi over here, Rashi says, Halohem ba'alei emunah lehitiv. Mulama bagadu eleh b'cha wa'en mevakshim emunah. In other words, you can be relied upon, Hashem, to reward the righteous, those who do good, and yet they continue to be unfaithful, to act treacherously towards you, Hashem. Rashi says, Hikita otam, you have struck them. V'lo na'asu holim ala makah. It's as if they didn't harm them, they didn't feel it. Lasum al libam lashuv mir'atham. They did not take anything to heart. Pasuk Dalet. Wa'ani amarti. And I said to myself, Ach dalimhem. They are very poor. They don't know what they're doing wrong. They're off the derech. They don't know it. Hem no'alu. The word no'alu is connected to the Hebrew word ewil. Ewil, aleph, waw, yod, lamed, is, in my view, most definitely related to the English word evil. right? Exactly the same letters, actually, because a fool does evil. Even if he doesn't actually necessarily plan or wish to do evil, by definition, he will do the wrong thing because he doesn't know how to do the right thing, right? Like as the Mishnah states in Masechet Avot, and En bur yirahet, it says in the Mishnah and Avot, correct? En bur yirahet. A bur is someone who has not learned at all. He knows nothing. So how can he be yirahet? He doesn't know that there is a het. He doesn't know what het is. He thinks he hasn't heard that this is wrong, this is right. So obviously he's not yirahet. He cannot fear doing the wrong thing if he has no idea what the wrong thing is, if he doesn't even know there are things that are wrong. If everything is equal and you do whatever pleases you, then you cannot possibly be yirahet. You cannot be God-fearing. And the Mishnah continues over there in Avot and says, En bur yirahet wa en am haaretz hasid, and an am haaretz who has learned a little bit and who does what he knows, but he doesn't know enough, he can't be a hasid. He might be, a good Jew who tries to do the right thing, and a lot of the time he succeeds in doing the right thing, but he will not be a hasid. He's not going to be a particularly righteous or pious person. Why? Because he doesn't know enough. In other words, studying Torah, and therefore knowing what Hashem defines as correct and what Hashem defines as incorrect, what Hashem defines as permissible, and that which Hashem defines as unacceptable. The Bor has no idea. And Am Haaretz has a vague idea, has a certain idea up to a point. So here in Yirmiyahu, he says, "Wani amarti ach dalim hem." They are lacking and they're not aware. No'alu, they are foolish. They are lacking understanding. They are lacking wisdom. Ki lo yada'u derech Adonai. They do not know the way of Hashem. Mishpat Elohim, the laws of Hashem. The Targum says,
Can I ask?
Absolutely.
Nowadays, because there are everyone has access. Every, let's say, religious Jew has access to basic Sfarim of Halacha. A large amount of religious Jews today know basic Halacha. Is that still considered an Amaretz? Someone who has a general sense of Halacha? He's no expert, but he knows what he was taught. Is that still considered an Amaretz?
Let me see, first of all, if I fully understand or correctly understand your question. Let's say we take a Jew from what we might call a standard Dati religious home today. For argument's sake, let's say in Israel.
Yeah.
And he went to what's called a religious school. There are all kinds, but let's say he went to one of these schools. And he also, let's say, even studied for a year in yeshiva. And let's say after that, maybe he went to the army, maybe he didn't, I don't know. And he did whatever he did. And then let's say he studied, I don't know, business management, or he became a plumber, or he became a builder, or he became a shepherd, or he became, I don't know, a doctor. Do we think, or if you're asking me what I think, do I think that the kind of education that almost all, shall we say, for now we're talking about a young man, but could be also a young woman, the kind of education they receive in such institutions, even 1 year in a yeshiva somewhere, and there are all kinds of yeshivot, we can't really discuss all the ins and outs of that, but he went to some, I don't know, Mechina K'dam Tzvait, he went to some yeshivat Hesder, he went to some yeshiva Kazo, Acheret, whatever it might be. But the truth is, I would say the same thing about a Bahur Haredi in a yeshiva Haredit after 1 year also. If you ask me, is he a Tamid Chachamim? I would say almost certainly no. The definition of a Talmid Chachamim we find in Masechet Barachot, Daf Mem Zayin. There it says, discusses or more precisely, what is the definition of an Am Haaretz? The discussion is what is the definition of an Am Haaretz for various halachic purposes. And the maskana of the Talmud, as expressed by Rav Huna, he says the halacha is ka'ahirim, that opinion which states as follows. Perhaps I can call it up here if you give me just one moment. Perhaps I can call it up. This is an important discussion, by the way. It's very relevant to what we are studying right now, even though what we're looking at now is Sefer Yirmiyahu, but this is one of the things that the more a person understands Torah and begins and learns Torah, a person begins to understand and sees more and more that all of the Torah is connected to all of the Torah. Everything is connected to everything. And you cannot learn one part of the Torah without understanding other parts of the Torah. So your question is a very serious question. The question here discussed, this is Berachot Daf Mem Zayin Amud Bet. And I will show you what it says here. Okay, so the Talmud states, with regards to Zimun, before Birkat HaMazon, that if we do not do Zimun with a non-Jew, with a Goy, with a Kufi, who is a kind of they converted, but their conversion was only sort of half-hearted. It was problematic, and the halachic status changed historically over time. But the Mishnah says Hakufim zamanim olav. So the question is, what about an Am Haaretz? And what is the halachic status of an Am Haaretz when it comes to Zimun? So here we have the Baraita. Here it says over here, if you can see where I'm pointing.
Yeah.
The Tanya, Ezuhu Am Haaretz. What is the definition of an Am Haaretz? Kol she'eno ochel hulo b'tahara, divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir's definition of an Am Haaretz is anyone, even though he's very knowledgeable, but he does not act like the Chachamim and their Talmidim, because it was common practice, not a chova. It's never been a halacha mehayeveth. It's not. There's not minat Torah and not midrabanan to eat all your food b'tahara. In other words, to be makpid al inyanei tumah v'tahara in one's daily life. This is not a chova, but it was an accepted standard of behavior amongst the Hachamim and the Talmidim. And Rabbi Meir says a person, even though he's knowledgeable and he's medakdek b'mitzvot, but he doesn't, in this regard, he doesn't do this thing. He doesn't act as the Chachamim act. He's considered still an Am Haaretz. So that's a rather stringent standard. Okay? V'Hachamim omerim kol she'eno ma'aser perotho kara'ui. And the Chachamim say they're less makpid. In other words, when it comes to Tumah v'Tahara, that's already a higher level. But an Am Haaretz is someone who's not makpid on Turumot u'Ma'asroth. If a person is makpid about Turumot u'Ma'asroth, even though it might be tameh, the food might be tameh in some way, it may have been touched by a person who was tameh or whatever, then he's not makpid on Tumah v'Tahara, but he's makpid about Ma'asroth, he's not an Am Haaretz. But if he's not makpid, then he's an Am Haaretz. And then it goes on to say, here later we have another discussion here. You see where I'm pointing? Tanu Rabbanan. Ezehu Am Haaretz. Kol sheno kore kriyat shema arvit v'shaharit divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer has a very low standard. He says any Jew who reads kriyat shema twice a day is not an Am Haaretz. He's already considered. He's part of he's counted amongst those Jews who are connected to the Torah. Maybe he's not perfect, and who is perfect? That's what Rabbi Eliezer might tell you also. No one's perfect, but he's trying, and he's doing what he knows, and he's willing to learn more, and so therefore we're not going to regard him as an Am Haaretz. So he can be part of our minyan. He can be part of our zimun. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, kol she'eno maniach tefillin. He doesn't wear tefillin as a rule, at least. Rabbi Yoshua says that's a sign of that's one of the distinguishing factors between Talmidei Chachamim, which literally means students of the Chachamim, or the followers of the Chachamim, and the others who they're not bad Jews. They don't try to do the wrong thing, but they're also not terribly pedantic about doing the right thing all the time either. And they're not used to wearing tefillin on a regular basis. So that's Rabbi Yeshua's standard. The Ben Azai Omer, Kol she'en lo tzitzit bevigdo. He who wears a four-cornered garment, which is Hayab tzitzit, and he doesn't wear tzitzit, that he's an Am Haaretz. Rabbi Nathan Omer, Kol she'en mezuzah al pitho. He who he's not makpid al miswa mezuzah. It's interesting how they each chose a different example or a different miswa. We won't go into all of that discussion now. It is discussed by certain farshim. Rabbi Nathan Bar Yosef Omer, Kol sheyesh lo banim, he who has sons, ve'eno megadolam letalmud Torah. But he's not overly concerned and not terribly conscientious about teaching and bringing them up in the way of Torah, or sending them to a Rav, to the Beth Sefer to learn Torah. In other words, he doesn't expend enough effort. He's not conscientious, and apparently, because he's not fully cognizant of the importance of this thing, he hasn't invested enough in his children's education, and that's a sign of an Am Haaretz. Maybe himself, he knows, but he doesn't fully understand what the importance and the how fundamental this is. And then we have another opinion. Ahirim Omrim, others who say, Afilu kara washana. Now, even a person who studied Tanakh, all of the Tanakh, washana, and he studied the Mishnah. V'lo shimesh tamidei chachamim, but he did not literally. Well, the word shimesh is to serve, but what it means here is to study under tamidei chachamim, to learn from the mouths of tamidei chachamim, of real chachamim. Harei ze am haaretz. That's a very stringent demand. In other words, it's pashut that he says kriyat shema, and it's pashut that he wears tefillin, and it's pashut that he has a mezuzah, and it's pashut that he sends his child to the cheder. But he did not himself study under Chachamim as one needs to in order. It's not, in other words, you have to understand the Mishnah. A person who was shoneh learnt Mishnah. It means he doesn't really understand all the Mishnah. He learnt it maybe even by heart, so he can recite it. But to understand what all of it means and what you should understand from these things and extrapolate from these things, from what the Mishnah states. And that is what we call the Talmud, that he didn't do sufficiently. And Rashi's and so that's what it says here, where it says in red, you see, Afilu kara v'shana v'lo shimesh tamidei chachamim, harei ze am haaretz. That's still am haaretz. That's the most mahmir, the most stringent of all standards that we've heard. Amar Rav Huna halacha ka'achirim. That is our standard. A person who is less than that is still an Am Haaretz. Now let's look at Rashi. Rabbeinu Shlomo says over here, where I'm pointing here, a bit above on the left. Rashi says, "Ezehu Am Haaretz shedibru Chachamim b'chol makom." Whenever Chachamim speak about an Am Haaretz, what did they have in mind? What were they referring to? What's the definition? So we saw the different opinions. Rashi says here, Shelo shimesh tamidei chachamim. What does that mean? He didn't serve them. It means he didn't make them a cup of coffee, didn't offer them a piece of cake when they came to step into his home. That's not what it means. It means shimush tamidei chachamim is hearing the Torah Ba'al Peh from people who know it and understand the Torah, so that you understand the inner workings of the Torah, not just the external, having heard the external words, the phraseology, having maybe even memorized lots of it, but you don't really understand the inner workings of it. So Rashi says, "Shalosh shemesh tamidei chachamim hu Gemara." This is censored. The Christians didn't like the word Talmud, so they always changed it to Gemara. So Rashi actually wrote hu Talmud, hatalui bisvara, which is a matter of understanding. Shehayu nothanim lidivrei Mishnah ta'am. The Chachamim would gather their students around them. They would recite the Mishnah for them. And if the students knew the Mishnah, they would recite the Mishnah and then explain the ideas, the concepts, the meaning behind the Mishnah, and the reason for what the Mishnah says, the reason for the different views in the Mishnah, perhaps. And therefore, what the halacha is that you derive from this Mishnah. Wa'yumith asfim yahad, and the Chachamim and their students would gather together, wa'asakim bechach, and this busy themselves with this study. Wahi dugmat haTalmud, it should say shesidru amoraim, and this is basically what the Talmud is. In other words, the Talmud that we have today is a written form of that oral teaching of Torah that used to go on once upon a time in the Beit Midrash. In the Beit Midrash, they had the Tanakh, they had the Mishnah, which was studied Baal Peh. The Mishnah was not written down originally. And then they would discuss it and explain it and expand on it and explicate what the Mishnah discusses and what underpins the Mishnah, the ideas behind it. And that's essentially what we have in the Talmud. So today it's written down. Once it was oral, now it's written before us. So you see, Rav Huna says, "Halacha ka'ahirim." To further understand this, I will relate to you the following story that I once heard, and I believe it's a true story. I wasn't there, but I heard it from someone. I think it rings true to me. Agon Rav Aaron Kotler established the yeshiva in Lakewood in the United States.
Yeah.
After the war, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was after the war. And the story goes, as I heard it, that a certain donor came to meet with Rav Kotler and whatever, and he wanted to show him the yeshiva, and the donor asked him, "How many students do you wish to have in this yeshiva? What is your aim? What is your vision?" He said, "We need to have a yeshiva with 1,000 students." By the way, it's many times that number today. But he said, "We need a yeshiva of 1,000 students." And the donor was maybe not such a Talmid Chachamim, maybe he was a good Jew, and maybe he had a lot of money, but he wasn't such a big Talmid Chachamim, perhaps. And he said, "Of Kotler, why do you need 1,000 students to produce a great rabbi, a great posek, or something like that? You need 1,000 students?" He said, "No, you don't understand. If I have 1,000 students, I can produce one Gadol b'Torah and 999 Mevinim. 999 Talmidei Chachamim, in other words, people who understand what a Gadol b'Torah is bichlal. You need not enough to have Gadolim b'Torah, you have to have people who understand what a Gadol b'Torah is. What is Torah? What is Torah really about? What is the value of the true Chacham b'Torah? Why is he important? You could put it another way. You need 999 to have a community of Jews. You need to have a 999 who will know why when the one walks into the Beit Midrash, everyone has to stand up. Most people don't necessarily understand that, as it says in Masechet Makoth. Amei Haaretz don't understand it. They don't understand what I have to get out because this Rav came into the room. That's one of the clearest signals that a person is a Talmid Chachamim. When he truly understands and appreciates why when this Gaon Gadol b'Torah walks into the room, he has to stand up, and he wants to stand up because he wants to be mechabed Torah. A person who's not, maybe he'll do you a favor, he'll stand up, not to be rude, not to be stick out like a sore thumb, or maybe whatever it is. But he's not doing it because he understands or he really wishes to do it. So this is a powerful story, and I think it's probably also even a true story. And it's always better than a story is not only powerful but also true. But anyhow, it's definitely powerful, and it conveys a very true message. And okay, so that's as far as that goes. All right, you should be able to see again Pasuk Dalet, correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So this is Yirmiyahu. So Yirmiyahu says, maybe these people are dalim, they just don't understand, they don't have enough understanding. They're simple people. No means they're not very great in understanding. They're even tipshim, perhaps. Ki lo yadou derech Adonai mishpat Elohim. They don't know really what they should be doing. That's the problem. And Targum Yonatan says over here, Wa'ana amareth, Baram Mida miskenin inun, because they are poor and lacking in understanding, itapashu, they act foolishly, without understanding. Are lo alifu, they did not study. Lemeda orhan de thakenon kadam Adonai, to know that which is the correct path before Hashem. Leme'ibad din dikshot kadam Elohim, to act properly in the eyes of Hashem. They don't understand Pashut. Rashi says over here, Wani amarti, Hanavi omer kach, and Yirmiyahu says this, Ach dalim hem michochma. They're lacking in wisdom and understanding. Elu shanim medaber imam. In other words, they don't listen, they don't hear what I'm saying because they don't have the tools, they don't have the ears to hear. That's exactly what I was telling about Rav Kotler. The 999 have the ears to hear what the Chacham says. People who were never in the Bet Midrash to begin with, they're not one of the 999. They're beyond the walls of the Bet Midrash. The Chacham can speak till he's blue in the face. They won't understand what he's saying. They won't appreciate. They won't take to heart what he's saying. And Yirmiyahu is saying the same thing. I'm speaking and talking and doing all these things, and it doesn't do any good. So then maybe the problem is that they're just lacking in chokhmah. They're lacking in understanding. Rashi says, No'alu, Lashon Ewil, Kethargumo, Itatpashu. In other words, foolish, lacking in understanding, lacking in wisdom. Radak says something interesting here as well. He says, Wani amarti, Amara Navi, Yirmiyahu says, Nisiti otham binyanei atochacha. I tried to chastise them, to tell them that where they're going wrong. Haketanim wa hagadolim, all of them, the small and the great amongst them. Amarti, klomar hashavti. The word amarti means when he says ani amarti, it means ani hashavti. Ba'asmi, I thought to myself, kishehochachti ha'am ulo kiblu, and I saw they don't take any note of what I say. They should stop worshiping avodah zarah. They should do teshuvah. They should do this. They should do that. They don't take anything to heart. Amarti ach dalim hem no'alu ki berov. What does that mean? Radak says ki berov. Usually, dalat ha'am, the simple people, en lahem da'ath uvina. They don't have understanding and wisdom. Kamo ha'gedolim, like the more important, the more learned people. Lefi shehem koromim v'yochavim. In other words, these people are farmers. They work the land. B'chol yizkehem avodat ha'adama. V'lo yit'aseku b'divrei musar u'b'torah v'chokhmah. Most people, and certainly in those days, didn't have very much opportunity to study Torah on a regular basis. Who were usually the Chachamim in ancient times, going back to the time of Beit Rishon? There were two classes. There were the Kohanim and there were the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im were the Chachamim also. They were the Rabbanim. Today we call them Rabbanim. We call them Rashi Yeshiva. We call whatever it is. Then they were called Nevi'im. And there were the Kohanim. The Kohanim were supposed to be Tofasei Torah, which is a term that we saw, if you recall. You and Yirmiyahu, Tofasei Torah. Those who carry the torch of the Torah. Lefichach lo kiblu tochacha. Therefore, they don't listen to my words. Ki no'alu wa'en lehem da'ath. Because they just don't know. That's what I thought. All right, so what happens now? That's okay. Therefore, elochali ela gedolim. V'adabara otham, and I will go to the leaders. The gedolim here doesn't mean gedolei Torah. It means important people with social and status and political power or influence. I will speak to them. They certainly will understand. If I speak to them, they're on people on a higher level. They'll get what I'm saying. Mishpat Elohim. And I tried that. Then they should know. Ach, hema yahdo shavuru'ol nikteku moseroth. But the truth is, they also didn't understand. They also did not exhibit any understanding, any willingness to understand, any ability to understand. These are very sadly tragic pesukim. If you think about, you can think about our situation today as well. How many Jews are there in the world today to whom you can say whatever you like, and it all just slips off them, like raindrops off a well-treated oilskin or raincoat. It doesn't just slides right off. It doesn't make any impact on them. Targum Yonathan. Ehachli lewath Rav Revaya. We'll go to the important people, the leaders, the great ones, literally. Wa'amalel imahon. I will speak to them. Are inun alifu lemeda orhan thakanan kadam Adonai lem'ibad din dikshot kadam alayhon. This is what I thought. I will go to them. They have learned. They've heard more. They've understood more. Surely they will understand. Baram, however, inun kahada miradu min oraitha. They have all turned their backs on the Torah. They have all rebelled against the Torah. Ithrahaku min ulfana. They all distance themselves from teaching and understanding. Rashi says, Elechali ela gudalim. I will go to the important, the great ones, the leaders. Hem yishma'u, so they must be able to hear. Achlo ho'arti, but it didn't work. V'gam hema yachdal shavru ulo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu me'elahem. They all have decided to throw off the yoke of Hashem from off their necks. Radak says something interesting here also. Again, the word Gedolim doesn't mean Chachamim. It means usually wealthy people. And the wealthy people are the people with more influence and more political power or what have you, influence, status. So the Radak says, Elachali Gedolim, ki lefi shehem Gedolim wa ashirim. These people are the leaders. They're wealthy people. They don't do manual labor like most people. Yesh lahim panai lilmod Torah. Why would they know more? Because they have more time. They have leisure time. They're less. They can spend some time studying Torah. Lilmod Torah.
Small technical question.
Yes.
I've seen the term, let's say, like in the Rambam, Anshe Maaseh.
Yeah.
Is that referring to the same idea, political leaders or
No.
well,
Anshe Maaseh refers to people who are knowledgeable, and they are also they know how to act in the real world according to the Torah. In other words, they do great things beyond the call of duty. That's why they call Anshe Ma'aseh. They do Ma'asim Gedolim v'Hashuvim, Ma'asim Tovim, beyond the call of duty. In other words, they're basically Hasidim, people who go beyond the call of duty, people who do the right thing. And in order to do the right thing, as we said, you have to study, you have to be knowledgeable, you have to be pious. You can't be a bur and you can't be an am haaretz. And then you can be an ish ma'aseh, which is not. It's not only that you actually do, and you teach and encourage others to do as well. Those are anshe ma'aseh. So the Radak says wealthier people have more time to study Torah. Yesh lehem penai lilmod Torah v'chokhmah. Uvarov hem ba'alei musar without, and therefore you will usually find amongst people who are better off financially, you will find that they're more literate, they're more knowledgeable, they've studied, and this was always the case historically also. Who do you think studied philosophy in ancient Greece? Your average Greek peasant or someone from an aristocratic family who could pay and he didn't have to work, and he could go pay the admission to enter the academy and study under Plato. Well, we know the answer. And by the way, this was also the case in Am Yisrael in the time of Beit Sheni, that the wealthier people were generally the Chachamim. And that is why that was part of the revolution of Beth Hillel as opposed to Beth Shammai. Beth Shammai tended to be from the upper class, the aristocratic, the wealthier class. They were very great chachamim, but they were not of the common people usually. They were wealthier, were better off. Beth Hillel Hillel himself was poor. He came from Bavel. He didn't have family here, apparently. No one would help him out. He was a very poor man. He couldn't afford the admission to enter the Bet Midrash of Shma'yan and Naftalion, as it says before Rashi Masechet Shabbat. So what did he do in Yerushalayim? He climbed onto the roof on a snowy day and to listen from the skylight to what was being discussed in the Bet Midrash, and he almost froze to death in the snow. That's the story in Masechet Shabbat. And that's why they heated up water on Shabbat to save his life, and etc. All right, so Bet Hillel represents a turning point in the study and dissemination of Torah amongst the Jewish people. It was more democratic in that sense, not democratic as Aaron Barak and his Rishaim would interpret the word. And when I say democratic, I mean it became something more widespread, something that more and more Jews were able to approach and achieve connection to the Torah and to the Chachamim. So the Torah should not be only for aristocrats and rich people. So Yirmiyahu says, and Radak explains, Uvarov says usually these wealthier people who have more time, they usually study and understand more. Uvarov hen ba'alei musar v'da'at, v'lamadu Torah u'mishpat Elohehem, v'ulai to'il bahem tochachti, ki yavinu yaskilu lema she'omar lahem. That's what I thought. והנה, כשדיברתי עמהם, יחדו שברו עול התורה, they broke the yoke of the Torah, אף על פי שידעוה, even though they were aware of the Torah. So the first you could claim were תינוקות שנשבו. They don't really know too much, but these people should know. They have little excuse. ניתקו עולה מעליהם וניתקו מוסרותיה ואמר יחדו, רוצה לומר כולם נוסתים כן, וכן תרגם ילפה. Okay, so these are interesting comments. You see also Rabbi Yosef ibn Kaspi over here says something similar. He says, הגדולים בכאן הם בעלי הקניינים העשירים. הפך הדלים. In other words, the dalim are poor people, and the gdolim are the rich people. ואמר ירמיה, כי היה אפשר לעניים שלא ידעו החוכמה, כי אין להם ידם לקנות ספרים ולזכור מלמדים. Poorer people, simpler people, couldn't afford to buy books. Books are very expensive. Today people think maybe books are expensive, but they're actually, I don't want to say dirt cheap, because that would be tahituth kavod for the sefarim, but they're actually very cheap compared to, once upon a time, you wanted to buy one Masechet of the Talmud for yourself, you had to employ someone, a scribe, to copy that Masechet, either onto parchment, which is very expensive, or onto paper, or what have you. And that was a long process, and it was very expensive. So they can't afford books, and they can't afford teachers to teach themselves or to teach their children. This is also one of the great revolutions, as is mentioned in the Talmud, Yoshua ben Gamliel, that he introduced basically public education. In other words, the requirement to have places of teaching for children, teaching Torah to children in every town and every place. Every child should receive a basic Torah education. All right, so those are the realities. So Yirmiyahu is reporting to us how disappointed he was when the more he looked into it, the more he spoke, the more even tried to pick and choose with whom he was going to speak and what he would tell them. Nevertheless, it didn't do any good. Al Ken, Pasuk well. Al Ken, Hikam Aryeh Mi'ar. Therefore, they will be punished. They will be hit hard by Hashem. Literally, they will be struck. They will be attacked by a lion from the forest. Ze'ev aravot yeshodadem. In other words, literally, it's talking about a lion and about a wolf. But as you'll see in the Targum, it's talking about the goyim that will come and attack them. Namer shoked alarehem, a leopard is going to besiege their cities. Kola yilse mehenna yitaref, and he who tries to leave the city will be attacked and eaten by these animals. Ki rabu pish'ihem, asamu meshuvothehem, because their evil actions are very great in number, and their waywardness is very great. What does the Targum say? Over here. Al-Ken, Melech b'mashir yafeh yisak alehon. Therefore, a great king, that's the Aryeh, the lion, a great king with his army will come upon them. Ke'aryah mihurashah, will come like a lion from the forest. Uiktalinun ananaya detakifin kedeve ramsha, and they will be killed by nations, by goyim, who will attack them like wolves in the evening. That's when the wolves come out, mainly. Ramsha is evening. So the word aravoth is understood by the Targum in Lashon Erev, evening, right? Ze'ev, which comes out to hunt at night. Yeshodadem will attack them, or literally like a shoded, like a highwayman. Namer shoked arehem. What does the Targum say? Yivzonunun shiltonin de hasinin kinimra. Great, powerful political powers and people and armies will come against them like a leopard, like no one can stop. Chamnin al kirwehon, they will surround their cities. Kol diipok minahon yitkatel ares agiin meradehon takifin tiyuvafahon. And Rashi explains more precisely what will happen to Am Yisrael if it continues to be wayward. Rashi says, Aryeh, the Pasuk spoke about Aryeh, Ze'ev, Nomer, and Rashi says, Aryeh is Malchut Bavel. Ze'ev, Malchut Madai, which came after. The next one is, in other words, initially there was Ashur, but Ashur was swallowed up, conquered by Bavel, and then Nebuchadnezzar was now king of Bavel and Ashur together, came and attacked up Mamlechet Yehuda and destroyed the Mikdash. So that's Aryeh, the lion, is Malchut Bavel. Ze'ev, Malchut Madai, the Persians. Namer, Malchut Yawan, the leopard refers to Yawan. And it says anyone who ventures out from behind their walls, Yitaref, will be attacked. Be'edom. Rashi says Be'edom, in other words. And here Rashi explains the next word, Ze'ev Aravot, not like the Targum, and which is more the Pshat, I think clearly. Rashi says Lashon Arava Ushuha. Right, Arava is an open, desolate place like the Arava, the desert. Ushuha is a pit. Zev Amidbar. In other words, Zev Aravot refers to a Zev from the uninhabited places. In other words, the wild animals like that don't live right next to human habitation. Sometimes they infiltrate. They come at night. They try and attack. If they can, sometimes a person. Sometimes they'll try and grab a sheep or a lamb or a chicken or whatever it is. Correct. So Rashi is explaining the pshat of the pasuk of the word Zev Aravoth, and the word Shoked. Rashi says Memaher. He explains that Milashon. They will be zariz, they will be nimble and quick in doing their work against Am Yisrael. Umenahem, that's Menahem ben Saruk. Hibroim lashon shemira, kmo lishkol al dal v'thai. In other words, they will be very diligent in doing the work that they're sent to do by Hashem. In other words, Am Yisrael will be very seriously and most grievously injured by all these different people.
Very good.
Baruch. היו ברוכים. חזקו ויאמץ לבבכם כל המייחלים לאדוני. שלום, שלום.
Shalom.